You know, I'm pretty sure that title is supposed to be Metal Frame. I'm gonna let you know up front, Psybuster is the worst game that was released on December 14th. It's one of those games that's all rough edges. And yet, I still kind of like it. It's weird, it's barely functional, but it also does quite a few distinctive things. Psybuster is the first Famicom game by Sculpted Software, and while it's their first game for a Nintendo console, it is very far from their first game overall. If you played computer games in the 1980s, you were probably familiar with something that they made, but not necessarily a lot of things that they made. By the time Psybuster came out, they had dozens of second-tier computer games under their belt. And tying into another December 14th game, they made the other final Atari VCS game. It's a situation where no one's entirely sure if Clack's or their game Fatal Run was the last Atari VCS game. And having broken into the console market in 1990, Sculpted Software would go on to make a lot of second-tier stuff, and also the Super Star Wars series. The point of that whole thing was that Psybuster was coming from a very different place than most Famicom action games. At this point, action games on computers tended to have a lot more complicated systems, but also weaker controls for the actual action. A combination that came out of having a lot more memory and a keyboard, but also much worse controllers. And Psybuster reflects that design philosophy. The plot of the game is that the Earth has been invaded by aliens. But due to a lucky break, humanity was able to capture one of the aliens' most powerful war machines. It's refitted for a human pilot, and now it's their job to take the battle back to the aliens. One of the more fun things in Psybuster is that the titular Psybuster is virtually indestructible. It's not totally indestructible, but you can walk around for a very long time soaking up bullets without any noticeable effect on it. Psybuster, by the way, is a tripod robot, not bipedal. Take a good look at the sprite, and sometimes you can barely make out the fact that it has 3 legs. The B button fires your gun, but the usage here is a little bit confusing. If you hold down B, then your gun will continue to fire, and it will rotate to fire in the direction that you push. It's not 360 degrees, it's basically up, forward, or down, plus the diagonals. But it's a pretty good range. And if you were moving when you hit the B button, the mech continues to move until you let go of B, so you can march forward while aiming the gun around. The A button jumps, and if you land on an enemy you'll stomp them flat. That's actually the only way to defeat some armored enemies you'll encounter. If you hit start, you'll bring up a status menu where you can check out the Psybuster's current loadout. The icons represent if you've picked up certain items. You can also choose to exit the mech, which will let the pilot get out and run around on their own. You re-enter the Psybuster by hitting select, or you could jump straight into the cockpit if you can get above it. As the pilot, you can climb up a lot of things, and you'll find that you often need to get out of the Psybuster to go hunting for items. The goal on every stage, except the final one, is to locate the key to the exit. It'll be hidden inside some terrain object somewhere, and once you've found it, you can just go straight to the end. It doesn't matter if you get there with or without the robot, it'll be with you when you start the next stage. Well, except for the 6th and final stage, where the pilot is outside of the robot the entire time. Many of the other pickups are divided up between ones that are useful for the pilot and ones that are useful for Psybuster. They each have their own health pickups. Psybuster's is the nuclear symbol, while the pilot's is the cross. They also have defense upgrades that reduce the amount of damage that they take. And in a weird turn, they each can get their own extra lives. Both the pilot and Psybuster start with 4 lives, and if either of those reach 0, then it's game over. But if Psybuster is destroyed, the pilot jumps out, so it's pretty difficult to run out of lives for Psybuster itself. If you do get a game over, then you can continue once. The rest of the pickups are weapon upgrades for Psybuster. You can hit select to rotate through these, assuming you can find them at all. The only one I found while I was recording was the one that makes your turret spin and fire a ton of shots. There are also smart bombs that you can get to destroy all enemies on the screen. While you're firing, you hit select to launch one of those. The stages are fairly sprawling, which makes it difficult to find that key if you're not using a guide. Level 1 puts you on the streets of New York, and you'll have to climb up to the top of skyscrapers and descend into the sewers in order to find items. You also have to use Psybuster to blow the manhole covers off. Stage 2 takes place in a pair of skyscrapers. Annoyingly, some of the floors are bad, and if you step on them, you'll fall through. In the first building, you can fall from the top all the way to the bottom. And unfortunately, one of the biggest problems for Psybuster the game is that your jumping is not very good. It's a bit stiff and unresponsive. Because going up and down in this skyscraper involves getting on the elevator and moving between floors, having the Psybuster Mech fall to the bottom means that the pilot has to climb all the way up above the elevator and then send it back down. I didn't find a lot of power-ups in the building, but I did eventually go, okay, I just gotta get on with it. A weird feature on this stage are these enemies that will lock the Psybuster in place, and you have to get out and defeat them in order to rescue the mech. Stage 3 takes you below the city, and you'll have to work your way back and forth through tunnels, sometimes clearing paths so that Psybuster can get through. Watch out for these enemies that will grab you and send you backward. They can be a bit tricky to avoid. That's how far I got, but I wasn't playing with a guide in hand. If you're playing with a guide, then you can zip over to the keys and any weapon power-ups you like, and then the game isn't really short, but it doesn't take a whole lot of time. If you're playing without a guide, then you're going to spend a lot of time exploring these huge stages. Psybuster isn't well known in Japan, but it seems to have a bit of a cult following. It is one of the more expensive Famicom cartridges to get. A cartridge-only copy is generally in the 6,000 to 7,000 yen range. My take on Psybuster is that it's a rough game that doesn't work as well as you'd like, but it has a lot of good things in it. There's a lot of unique enemies and environment designs, and while the Psybuster is slow and clunky, it really conveys the feeling of a walking tank. I can't say this game is good, but it is distinctive. And I think that's what makes me still kind of like it.